first of all, thank you everyone for coming along. It's really lovely to see so many of you turn up for this. Navigating Turbulent Times. I've kind of subtitled it. If not now, when? Because it feels that that's where we are in the turning of the my screen's just gone the turning of the planets at the moment. So this is really a discussion on mainly focusing on Pluto and Aquarius, but there's lots and lots of other major transits over the coming years, as if we haven't been through enough, really. There's still more to come. So I just wanted to give us a brief reflection on how we got here, because Pluto entered, if you think back to 2008, if you can think back that far, Pluto entered the sign of Capricorn men, and Pluto has been in Saturn's domicile, temple, home, whatever you want to call it, ever since then. Because Capricorn and Aquarius in a traditional astrology are ruled by Saturn. So with a little help from Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus and Neptune, he's basically rocked our world over the last years since 2008. It doesn't take much to remember. 2008 was the last major financial crisis we had, and it's really interesting that as Pluto is in the very last degrees of Capricorn now, about to move into Aquarius, we have major banking crisis again. They're different reasons, but it's the same fundamental issue that the banking system isn't fit for purpose. Really. We've had wars, economic turbulence, we've had Brexit, we've had Trump, we've had all the issues with social media, fake news, neoliberalism, climate breakdown, and of course the global pandemic. And now he's about to leave the sign of Aquarius. But it's not going to be simple or straightforward. It's not going to bring that age of freedom and enlightenment that maybe some people are hoping for. It's not going to bring it, I should say, automatically. And obviously these are really radical times. And I think wishing things could be better and hoping things will get better is a natural reaction to where we are at the moment. But with all the extraordinary shifts that we've already experienced, I think that there's going to be a continuation of those shifts. There may be different themes, they may manifest differently, but we're still in an age where things are changing all the time. If we throw in Saturn now moving into the sign of Pisces, we're really in an age where the impossible feels and may well be more probable than ever. Saturn in Pisces is an interesting one, and I'll talk about it a little bit. So we need to think about what will the impossible look like and how can we work with all those energies in our own lives and in the greater community. So those are the kind of themes that I want to explore. But let's start with today. This is the chart right now. And I just wanted to highlight this. Now, I didn't deliberately choose now, but I knew lots of this was going on, clearly, but this wasn't a deliberate choice to choose this moment. And this is this very moment, at 7:30 today. And we could see here's Pluto, just 8 minutes away from moving into Aquarius. And it's causing all sorts of grief right now. We have, at this very moment, an exact conjunction between the Sun, Mercury, and Neptune. And that is exactly square Mars in Gemini, which has just left its shadow period. It's been retrograde for a very long time, and it's now finally moved forward and gone past where it began its retrograde back in whenever it was last year. September, I think it was. There's other things on this chart as well, but it really is a fascinating chart. So I think I draw from that the fact that we're really, really close to this Pisces. Oh, and we've also, of course, got Saturn having just moved into Pisces here as well. So that's a fascinating chart, I think. So the Neptune Sun Mercury thing always kind of makes me think, looking at that I'm either going to be talking wonderful, insightful things, I'll be talking absolute nonsense. It's make no sense whatsoever, and you can forget everything I've said tonight. We might be dreaming what we're looking at now. So I hope you find that really interesting. I just found it fascinating when I looked. As I say, I didn't realize that this was this moment in time. But there we are. So let's start with this quote. I found this quote from someone on YouTube the other day, and it really brought home, I think, to me the power of Pluto moving through the two Saturnian signs of Capricorn and Aquarius. So this is from Novara Media, and it was published in February 2022. The second half of the 20th century held out the promise of something different, however. The character of this period's steady improvement, widespread prosperity and progress may yet prove a historic blip, however easily conflated for an internal law of human affairs by its principal beneficiaries. There were public pensions and unemployment insurance, the weekend and pop music, constantly rising living standards, and in the global north at least, an absence of war. The horizon of history appeared to be that things got better. Until it didn't. If you have to put an arbitrary date on that shift, it would be 2008. I don't think it's arbitrary. I've already said that. It matches exactly when Pluto entered Capricorn. It marks not only by the collapse of Lehman Brothers, but the war between Russia and Georgia, betokening the possibility of conventional war returning to Europe. The energies unleashed since then, that's a very Plutonian word, I think. The energies unleashed since then, economic inertia, political stasis, often shaped by gerontocracy and a demise of the global order, are the background for younger generations looked down upon as somehow uniquely fortunate. And I don't think Novara Media knew that they were speaking of the astrology, but that really summarizes an awful lot of what we've experienced since 2008. So let's have a little bit more of a look at some of the things we've experienced. I'll just note some of them. I'm not going to dwell on these. I don't want to spend too long looking back, but it's important we look back to get an understanding of the sorts of things that have happened. Obviously, we had the global pandemic. We can't forget that. We've had recession. We've had banking crises. We've had inflation, and that's returned again now. We've had political upheaval in much of the West and in Europe, not just in this country, but Turkey, Hungary, Ukraine, the US, and all over the world. There's been political upheaval. We've had the rise of fake news. What's true? What's not true? Who has the right to free speech and who doesn't? And we have had the return of war in Europe. And that's just a few of the things at a high level. I know it's very reductionist, but you get the picture. We don't want to dwell on it too much. So I'll share with you the timeline of when some of these planets change now, and then we'll go into a little bit more depth about that again so we can understand what has been going on. So Pluto entered Capricorn in 2008, which we've also already talked about. Saturn entered Capricorn in December 2017, and then Aquarius in December 2020. Jupiter, this is really important. Jupiter was conjunct Saturn. It's known as the Grand Conjunction in traditional medieval astrology, because those were the furthest two planets out. The medievals and the Hellenistic astrologers didn't know of the outer planets beyond Saturn. And they met at 0 degrees Aquarius on the winter solstice of 2020. Hugely significant, and I spoke about it to some people at that time about what it may have promised us. Now, Saturn has already entered Pisces, actually. It hadn't when I wrote this. It entered Pisces on the 7th of March, and it entered on a Virgo full moon. And full moons, as we all know, are the culmination of something, and where things have manifested, and now we begin to try and make use of them as we move down into the darkness of the dark moon coming up. Hugely significant again that it's on a Virgo full moon. Pluto enters Aquarius on the 22nd of March 2023. But it isn't that straightforward. I've got some notes here. So Pluto goes into Aquarius on the 22nd of March, but then it comes back out again into Capricorn on June 2023. Then it moves back into Aquarius again on January 2024 and is in there in Aquarius till September 2024. Then it moves back into Capricorn, and then it finally stays in Aquarius from November 2024. So it's a dance across those 2 points. So it's not straightforward, and we're going to find that Pluto and Capricorn and Pluto and Aquarian themes changing and moving and shifting. And as I've said before to some people, this is a process, and it's going to be a very confused process to start with before we finally get Pluto in Aquarius. And the process continues all the time that it is in Aquarius. In addition to that, Jupiter enters Taurus in May 2023, and then in a year's time, 2024, it moves into Gemini. Jupiter has a part to play because Jupiter rules Pisces, and we know Saturn is in Pisces. Saturn enters Aries in May 2025, another big shift. And look at this, having had the Jupiter conjunct Saturn, the grand conjunction at 0 Aquarius on the winter solstice in 2020, Saturn is going to be conjunct Neptune at 0 degrees Aries on February 2026. 0 degrees Aries is the equinox point. It's the start of the whole of the zodiac. That's the starting point of the zodiac. I mean, that just blows my mind, really, to be honest. And Uranus has been in Taurus since 2019 and will finally enter Gemini in April 2026. So we're looking at themes and topics here that go right the way through to April 2026 and beyond, really. So let's have a quick look at Saturn. Saturn moving into Pisces. We've got the Lord of Boundaries moving into Pisces. That's a tricky one, isn't it? But what does Saturn represent? I mean, his limit, structure, solidity, stability, his order, his form, discipline, his concrete manifestation. There are limits, structures, material achievements. He's about control and discipline, and can bring us a sense of insecurity if things aren't going well. He's very serious, he's practical, he's rigid. He works with the past, with tradition. He's very conservative. He's a really strict authoritarian figure. He's about maturity, mortality, endings of things. He's the planet that says no. He's weighty. He's about burdens, challenges, our work, our responsibilities and restrictions. And he rules in traditional astrology, Capricorn and Aquarius. I'll talk about Uranus a little bit as well, because that's the modern ruler of Aquarius, if you use the modern rulers. Did I go too far? No. So let's think about Pisces. That's where Saturn's gone. That's where he is now. It's a twin fish. Fishes, I never know grammatically which one's correct. Pisces is mutable water. And Pisces in modern astrology is ruled by Neptune, but in traditional astrology, Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. So the modern ruler is Neptune. And Pisces is a sign that's considered intuitive. It's very present in terms of spirituality and tranquility. It's a trusting sign, it's imaginative, it's empathic, it's compassionate, it's connected, it's expansive, spiritual, philosophical, all of those sorts of themes about it. Some people think Pisces isn't terribly ambitious, but I know some very ambitious Pisceans, and I know some Pisceans who have some really strong qualities. Some people may consider Pisces being the last sign, it brings everything together. It brings the whole zodiac together. It's that final sign. So I consider it that the white light. I've always said Aries is the splintered light where we begin our journey. Pisces is where everything's come together in a white light of wholeness and completion. So it's also sometimes considered ungrounded, delusional, escapist, living in a fantasy and boundless. And that's most of the things that I guess you attach to the Neptunian rulership of Pisces, and those themes would have been once upon a time, back in the day, part of Jupiter's remit as well. So if you are working with an ancient astrology, you may consider that to be relevant to Jupiter too. So what happens when Saturn dives into Piscean waters? As you with all astrology, to know what the themes are, we need to go back into the past. That's how astrology's always worked. Babylonians would look at the stars, and when a planet rose with I don't know, in a full moon, then and something happened, then that would be associated with that. And nothing's really changed. We still do that the same way now. So what happened when Saturn was in Pisces? Well, 64, 67, and 94 to 96 are the last two times Saturn was in Pisces. And I'll talk about some specifics. So let's say 64 to 67. We had the Beatles, we had Bob Dylan, we had reduction in nuclear arms, we had the Vietnam War, we had protests and revolution about that, and we had massive space exploration, money being spent on getting into space. Between 94 and 96, we saw maybe a more negative side. We had the Rwanda genocide, we had Yeltsin, who's a known alcoholic, leading Russia, but we also had the South African free elections. The Eastern European borders were redrawn after some horrific wars in Eastern Europe. We had an impotent John Major conservative government fighting the anti-European faction of his party. We had the Clinton scandals. Artistically, we had The Lion King, Forrest Gump, Three Weddings, True Lies, kind of escapist stuff. Oasis was huge in the charts. Wet, Wet, Wet. And we had D-Ream, Things Can Only Get Better. Spice Girls, Take That, Michael Jackson, Prodigy, all of those sort of people were really big. We also had a sense of political shifting sands here. And we've had socialist Western governments during these periods as well. So the Labour Party, I did talk about John Major, but there's been strong socialist governments during these periods. But there's also been violence and unrest. Protest movements have increased. But at the same time, we've seen wonderful artistic innovations and populist themes. I guess I'd call them populist themes. So, Saturn's dance with Neptune. We've got another dance going on here as well, with Saturn entering Pisces on the 7th of March, as we've said. But they're both in the same sign now until 2025. Both stay in there. And they almost conjunct, but not quite, in October 2025. And then they both move into Aries. But because one another is moving retrograde, they don't quite meet there. And they're in Aries between May 25 until October 2025. They both move back into Pisces, October 2025 until February 2026. Then both move back into Aries again in February 2026, and their exact conjunction is in Aries on the 19th of February, as we've mentioned already. So again, and then Saturn enters Taurus eventually in 2028. So they're no longer in the same sign anymore. They're not sharing the same signs. So you've got this dance now of Saturn, Pluto, Neptune, and there's more. But let's talk about Saturn in Neptune now between 2023 and 2028 quickly. And I subtitled this "A Dark Night of the Soul" with a question mark. Saturn in Neptune. Can manifest itself as a dark night of the soul. Saturn being that kind of the place of limits, being with Neptune in Pisces can bring out all sorts of issues with us. Let's go through some of them here. I could foresee here, I'm not saying all of these things will happen, they're likely to happen with what's gone on in the past. So we may see increased political and social unrest. We may see a change in social justice, how we perceive social justice, and that could be positive and or negative, both together. If you think about Saturn trying to build foundations on a sandy beach, the tide of Neptune and the tsunamis of Neptune coming in there, you've kind of got that shifting sands thing. So global uncertainties and unpredictability abound. There's also a tendency to find religious extremism and secularism. Saturn, if Jupiter's the planet of religion and spirituality, Saturn is the pragmatist, and he can put up walls and boundaries either way. So we might find the extremist religious person, or we might find the nihilist who has no religion, and secularism begins to become dominant. Not that it isn't now. So religious fanaticism may be part of it, or skepticism and nihilism. There might also be literal physical water involved with this, and possibly floods. I noticed the last few days there's been floods in Turkey, India, Pakistan, and in California, where they've had a drought. They've suddenly had massive rains, and the rivers have burst their banks, and they've got huge floods now in California right now, which is really interesting. And there might be changes to how we do business, changes to digital business models. Saturn with Neptune there might feel that there's time to change how we do business, how we work within capitalism. So is it the dark night of the soul, or is it a new age? As we see at the same time, we can see things like artistic inspiration and innovation that we talked about. And there's much more that we could think about there. So this may be a golden age of music and art, of film, and all those sorts of things. We could see an establishment of deeper philosophical and spiritual ideals. And there may be some sort of benefit here for people who operate with esoteric principles, with spirituality, energetics, dreams, healing, things like that, where if we can harness the purpose of Saturn without losing the message of Piscean themes, those are all possible to us. But with Saturn, there's always work involved. None of that's automatic. None of that can necessarily happen unless we put the effort in. So what about Jupiter in Taurus, moving into Taurus as we saw? So Jupiter moving into Taurus in May 2023, I think it is a case of Jupiter's moving from Aries into Taurus. So that's a big change. Jupiter in Aries wants us to get moving, get things done, do it now, wants to expand action and doing things. Moving into Taurus, it'll ask us, I think, to come back much more in touch with our own bodies and with the earth. I think there could be a much stronger in terms of environmental issues with Jupiter moving into Taurus, especially as Jupiter's going to be there with Uranus as well. Uranus is still in Taurus, so Uranus wants to do the unconventional, and Jupiter there will be an enabler for those changes that we need. We may be seeing dance, movement, somatic healing, and being in touch more with the wonder of nature that's all around us. I think all of those themes are quite possible. So now we move on to Pluto. So I'm sure most of you know Pluto is a planet right on the edge of the solar system. There are some what's known as trans-Neptunian objects as well, and Pluto really, I think, technically is a trans-Neptunian object now, because it's not very big and was once a planet, and now it's a a mini planet or whatever they decide it is. But it seems that since we found it, it has a massive effect on us and our world. So Pluto, Lord of the Underworld. That's what he is in mythology, and that's what he seems to be in terms of what he means in astrology. He's slow, he's relentless, and he's absolutely unavoidable. He's a process. He doesn't do things quickly or suddenly, but he is always there. He brings us hidden gifts. He brings us endings that we may not want, that actually ultimately serve us really well. I have described him and often describe him as our undercover secret secret agent. In mythology, some Greek mythology, he has a helmet that gives him invisibility. So with his helmet on, he could be lurking around the corner, or with his raincoat and his collar turned up and a hoodie or something over his head, hiding there, looking at us, but following our every move. And he's there all the time. So he represents themes of renewal and transformation and evolution. But he does that through the themes of death, decay, and destruction. He is the Lord of enforced change and regeneration. Liz Green says, Pluto governs that which cannot or will not change by making it change. He's primordial energy. He impels us to make changes whether we want to or not, and he's an elemental force, really. So we can't ignore Pluto. The more we ignore Pluto, the more difficult our lives can become. And even if you don't work with astrology, if you go back, I suggest you'll probably find, certainly it happens to me in my chart, that when Pluto crosses significant planets or significant angles on your chart, huge change happens to you. It takes you into a crisis of one sort or another, but ultimately when you come out the other side, you're far, far better for it. But you may not welcome it when it comes along. So Pluto, in the next few days, is going to move into Aquarius. So Aquarius is the water carrier. And although he's the water carrier, or she's the water carrier, depending on how you picture Aquarius, it's fixed air, which is an interesting concept. So we have fixed air. What's fixed air? Have a think about that. I'm not going to go, I haven't got time really to go into what that means. And my previous videos, when I spent time talking about these, we would have talked about this much more. But fixed air and a water carrier. Aquarius is seen as being something, or gives us the quality of progressive attitudes. It's humanitarian, unconventional, eccentric, envisioning. But Aquarius is also rebellious, radical, dictating, can be fanatical, extreme, chaotic, outlandish, and, well, I've put deviant. But what's deviant? What's deviant to one person isn't deviant to another. It's outside of our traditional societal norms, let's say. Aquarius can be. May find it very difficult to fit in. But Aquarius can also be an undisciplined and impractical, detached, impersonal, aloof, disorganized, and antisocial. Rather flippantly, but I think there's an element of truth. I always say that Aquarians, and it doesn't mean an Aquarian sun on its own, but people with a stellium of Aquarian planets, or an angle or a rising sign, are tend to love humanity but not human beings. They like to keep their distance from others. They like to be that detached, impersonal organizer, as well as being sometimes disorganized in their own life. They want to be involved in groups and be organized. I'm going to go slightly left field here for a second, because having talked about all of these transits, I just wanted to show you. This is the chart of Pisces, of Pluto moving into Aquarius. This is the day, just a few days afterwards. So we can see Pluto's just moved into Aquarius here. And this is on the outside. This is the chart of when William the Conqueror was crowned. It's a midday chart. We don't know exactly when, but it was generally done, I think, at middays, apparently. And what's really interesting here with this chart is we have Pluto on England's 1066 chart. It's almost directly on top of Neptune, on top of Venus. We have Saturn exactly on the 1066 Pluto chart. And there was something else I saw as well. Saturn here. I thought there was a square, but I can't see it now. I should have made notes. But you have the two Pluto, they've got the two Pluto aspects here, which means this charts never end. They're kind of a signature that sits in the skies and in our history forever. And not many people use the 1066 chart, but it's fascinating that this is the chart here. So there's extra significance to these Saturn changes and these Pluto changes, I think, for England in particular. Let me clear that because I want to show you. This is the transits with the UK Union chart. Let me clear those drawings. So this is the 1801 chart of the Union. So it doesn't include poor Northern Ireland, which was later on. But I very rarely find major significance with those, but we always seem to find some sort of significance with this chart here. And you'll notice here that transiting Pluto is within 1 degree of the UK Union's chart of Jupiter. We've already spoken about Jupiter. So that Pluto transit is activating our Jupiter in Leo, all that pride. Maybe it's false pride, I don't know, but it's significant to me that that's there. And of course, the US has just gone through its Pluto return, which is even more huge. But that, remember the Saturn-Pluto conjunction we had in the 1066 chart? It's actually reversed here with Saturn moving over the natal Pluto as opposed to Pluto moving over the natal Saturn. So it's actually echoed, Saturn and Pluto is echoed within the Union chart and England. Now, what does that foretell? I have no idea. But it means there's huge significance to these particular transits and what's going on. As well as being huge globally, there is particular emphasis on how they may affect these islands, this country. So now we need to go back into the past. What happened with Pluto when it was in Aquarius in the past? A potted history, I guess. 1532 to 1530. This doesn't happen that often. 1532 to 1553 was the last but one time it was in this sign, and 1777 to 1798. That was the very last time it was in these things. Yeah, so Pluto in the past. So 50. I mean, it was 1529 when Henry VIII severed ties with Rome and he established himself as head of the English Church. But obviously, that rumble continued right the way through, where it ended up with all sorts of persecutions of the Catholics in this country and all sorts of issues with Scotland that remained Catholic as well. So Scotland, as an independent nation, there had its own law. In 1534, England passed the Act of Supremacy by Henry VIII, and then the Treasons Act, and then Thomas More and Cardinal John Fisher were executed in 1535. There were executions all over the place, really. And then in 1542, in Scotland, Mary Queen of Scots acceded to the throne, causing more turmoil, and so on. And then in 1558, of course, Elizabeth I came onto the throne. So it was a major time of political uncertainty and religious uncertainty. Between 1777 and 1798, we see the expansion of the British Empire. James Cook sailing around the world, claiming all sorts of land. We saw industrial revolution. We saw mechanization, mass movement to cities, technology, and civil unrest again. So we had these revolutions there as well. So we had the American War of Independence, which led obviously to the US breaking away from Britain. The French Revolution was at the same time, and this country, the UK or England anyway, was absolutely terrified that that revolution would come across the Channel, those in power. And I've put the East India Company underneath revolution because ostensibly it was a private company, but it was completely sanctioned by the English government and decimated India. Absolutely decimated India. It stripped it of all of its resources, took them for themselves, and then sold it back to the Indians at an inflated price, which really, I mean, we won't go into the politics of it, but it was just unbelievable that we basically took India by force, along with lots of other countries. So, but it was also a time of great exploration and increasing technology. There was the cotton mills began here. Now there was much more. Iron production was in full flow. People began moving into the cities, as I've already said. So if that's the case, how do we move that and decide what's going to happen this time, moving it forward? So we can say there's transformative processes going on here. Transformation is going to be, I guess, the byword of this particular area, but will it be rocky and painful, or will it be smooth and easy? AI is already making itself very manifest, so how will that continue? Is it going to be good robotics, bad robotics, a mix of the two? We're already seeing wonderful progress in robotics in terms of medicines and so on, but there's also some weird stuff going on. And of course, AI, there's the issue of where does the creativity belong, because AI at the moment is nothing more than kind of stripping things that are already out there, whether they're in the public domain or not, and rejigging it and rewriting things and creating different art and so on. So how will AI impact us going forward? Will jobs be lost? Will jobs change? Whatever. There's likely to be financial instability. Yeah, but we're kind of used to that in some ways, aren't we? The thing about Pluto and Aquarius, there's this thing about Pluto always wants to make things bigger or smaller. So we could expect the rich to get richer, and I think we could expect the poor to get poorer. And plutocracy, being governed by the rich. We may see a whole irrational scientific material world begin to appear, which is very much not the way that the Aquarian age maybe was perceived, but that's what seems to happen in the late 1700s. Lots of religions were suppressed around the world, and things like astrology and divination and so on were basically criminalized and made illegal because it wasn't seen to be rational and logical. So we may see optimistic and unrealistic expectations going forward as well. And to be honest, this was really the reason I decided to make this little Zoom presentation, because I've seen some really, really good astrologers go completely overboard about how wonderful Pluto in Aquarius and Saturn in Pisces is going to be. And it might be, but it might not. And that's really what I want, to get a balance between the two. I'm never going to be one of these mega popular astrologers, because I do tend to try and tell it like it is, as opposed to the way we want it to be. I hope the optimism is correct, but we need to be aware that this isn't going to be automatic, and we need to be buying into how we can impact what's going to change the world. To be honest, in 2043, I'm not going to be around, so it's not going to affect me that much, but there we are. We might also see spiritual bypassing and neglect, and I think we see that already sometimes. And spiritual bypassing, is really just being so totally optimistic about things, and thinking that we can burn a bit of incense and do some Reiki, and suddenly we're spiritual masters and everything's going to be wonderful. So there's more to it than that. There's also a huge potential for violent revolution here. We've seen it time and again. And it's important to recognize that that's there. So the last 15 years or so are leading up to something that may begin to boil over as we move into Aquarius. And we're almost certainly going to see new power structures and systems, where the old systems that are no longer fit to purpose begin to disintegrate. And they've already begun. It's all been brought up while Pluto was in Capricorn. All of the things that we thought were there for life have gradually been swept away, and the reliance on certainly in this country, of custom and practice in terms of government has completely been blown away by the fact that those customs and practices are no longer relied on or recognised, and are completely ignored by some politicians. We may well see a spiritual awakening. These are the more positive things. We may well see a paradigm shift in consciousness, and I think that can go alongside some of the other more negative things that were happening here. So, and I hope we'll see increased ecological action with all of the potential for scientific progress. I think there's a really good chance, if we focus on globally on the ecology and the environment, we can do something. And I hope there's going to be, and I think there will be, technological advances to improve our own lives. And frankly, I think this is going to signal the end of capitalism as it currently exists. Whether it will morph into a different form of capitalism, or whether the system itself will completely and utterly collapse and something new, better comes from it, I'm not sure. I don't know. I won't be around to see it. But I think capitalism as it currently exists is going to prove to be impossible to sustain. And we're already seeing that, I think, again with the banks, and the banks are being bailed out because they can't manage the money that people want to get back from them when they see a run in power. And that's all connected with technology as well. The fact that Twitter and social media is driving the runs on the banks, where apparently they could have survived if people weren't suddenly being made aware of the fact that there were some risks involved. So I want to just say here, what we do not honour, we will lose. And we will lose it. And that's really important to recognise here. What do we honour, and what do we not honour? So working magically with the energy of these times. You see, Pluto is ultimately about transformation. And yeah, he's a god of the underworld, but with Pluto, it's never a personal thing. He's not trying to harm us. He's not trying to scare us. But he may scare us. But his influence really is part of a cosmic, or all of these cosmic patterns coming together now. It's about waking us up, I think. It's about recognizing that we may have been working with false gods as a society, working with false gods and meaningless values. And this is now a time to face the shadow of that society and bring a joy of sacred communion and service. back into all that we do. The thing about Pluto is he doesn't really care how we get there. He just wants to get there. So you've got this volcanic, seismic, irresistible force here, which may well manifest in terms of volcanic, seismic, irresistible, physical happenings as well. So that's why he's really feared. It's because he's relentless and we continue to do the wrong things and continue to try and keep things as they are. He's going to match us more than blow for blow. He's probably going to increase some of the challenges that we face to make things move into a more sustainable society, a more sustainable planet, a more sustainable way of working with all the living beings of this planet. So really the best way to dance with Pluto is to work with him and follow his lead. So is this an opening for the sacred, the mysteries and the unseen to come more into mainstream awareness and acceptance? I ask it as a question because I don't know. Do we have the will and the capacity to make that change? If you think about the fact that Pluto is in Aquarius, I've seen Aquarius described as the unicorn of the zodiac. It marches to the beat of its own drum, does Aquarius. And it is associated with groups, communities, humanitarian values, technology, science, modernity, and a vision of a democracy that offers us a form of social freedom. But that social freedom is often one that can restrict our personal freedoms. And that's the tricky bit, I think, with this, is how do we find that balance? Because it's sometimes difficult to find that balance between personal freedom and social freedom. And sometimes that balance can tip from one side to the other side. And that's when we begin to see examples of suppression and things that we may not like. I try not to get too political in this, where we see the othering of people that aren't like us. And that's the dark side, that's the shadow side of the Aquarius. Aquarius is a fixed sign, so it doesn't really, sounds terribly cold, but it's not a sign that wants to work with emotions so much as working with higher minded principles. As it has progressive, egalitarian, idealistic, futuristic principles, but they can also be quite impersonal because they're looking at the collective. Aquarian energy is looking at the collective. It's not looking at the individual. So are we going to see 2 decades of volcanic transformative energy? Are we going to see destruction, power plays, manipulation, shadow energy on the loose? Or are we going to turn around our society looking for support for positive, progressive change that works for us, where we don't need to go down the route of maybe violent revolution and change? And I don't know what the answer is to that. But I do know if we work together magically, then there's something that we can all do to help that. So if you've got, one thing I wanted to mention here, I haven't got a slide for this, but if you've got planets around 0 degrees Aquarius or 28, 29 degrees Capricorn, or your sun is there, or one of your angles, especially on the MC or the ascendant, then be aware that you're probably going to feel these energies much more palpably, more personally than someone whose Aquarius is tucked away, say in the 8th house or the 11th house or somewhere like that, where you might just find yourself watching all this going on the TV and thinking, I don't really know what the fuss is all about. Isn't it terrible that this and that and the other has happened, but it's not affecting you personally? Some of you it will affect much more personally than others. So we're always working on our own with this. It's important to recognize that. But by working in a magical way to begin to manifest the dreams that we want, there's a chance that we can awaken this pathway more globally. So let's ask some questions here. What is magic? If we're going to work with this in terms of magically, we need maybe to define what magic is. And I'm not going to go down and define it. Again, this is going to be quite reductionist. I apologize to those of you who work deeply magically, but it's a really strong psychological and philosophical debate of what magic is and how it works anyway. But let's just go with this. So magic is about connecting to all that is. And if you think about spirit and matter being two sides of the same coin, I saw the other day there was a really well-known druid who was saying astrology is bunkum and is completely incompatible with druidry. Druidry is spirituality and religion of the earth, then astrology is bunkum. But I think that neglects the fact that when we stand and look on across the horizon, we're standing on our earth, but everything above us, everything around us, is the sky and the planets. They're intimately connected. They're two sides of the same coin, just the same as spirit and matter are. Just because we can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The spirit world is here, and it's alongside our material world. But collectively, I think we've lost the ability to see it and connect to it. The world, I think, is driven by rationality. The world we live in at the moment is about rationality and material things. And if we can't see it, touch it, measure it, then it can't possibly exist. So if I start making prayers to all the beings seen and unseen, there's 99.9% of the country are going to think I'm utterly bonkers. But the magician, the shaman, the medium, they know this to be true. They know that the world isn't just matter, it's spirit and matter, and spirit exists all around us. It's magic that connects them. And we get what we ask for. Whether you believe in the magic of manifestation or not, I mean, the one thing about manifestation is if you ask to manifest it and then it doesn't happen for you, then there's a tendency, I think, for some people to think they're failures. I can't do it. I'm useless. I'm rubbish. Well, maybe it's just the fact that the planets weren't in alignment or it wasn't the right time for you. There's all sorts of reasons why we can't manifest every single one of our dreams. Otherwise, we would all be multimillionaires living in massive mansions, for example, if we wanted that to be what we wanted in our lives. But we always get what we ask for. And we need to remember here there's two forms of magic, if you like, of act and craft, which I talked about in my shamanic courses. It's powerful magic being used for forces, for good, or for ill. Mact is might. So I would suggest one of the most important recent magicians has been Donald Trump, who has used mact, force, imposing his will and everything he wanted on society in the US and across the world because of who he is and what he could do. The craft is working within a society that wants to help all of us. It's with respect and honor and dignity that craft comes through. So we need to ask ourselves, what's our vision? What do we envision for the future? If we think about imagination and dreaming combined with working with the spirits that can create whatever it is we're imagining, if we're imagining things that bring us fear, if we're imagining a world that is utterly dominating and heartless and controlled by certain people, then Pluto will take us down into that underworld where we could see from a different perspective of what reality is. But we need to remember too that the other world isn't just a physical place, it's a place where we connect to other beings, to our ancestors, and to a wisdom that comes through the stars whether you consider them to be star beings or galactic forces, it's entirely up to you. It all works. If you imagine that there are connections to some of the galaxies out there, then there may well be those there. We could all work in our own way with this. This isn't about all doing the same things the same way. It's connecting to a deeper vision of what society should be and how we want to live our lives. And we can't measure magic and imagination with rational measures, methods. It doesn't work, does it? You can't just do it. So scientists can't believe anything like this works because it's beyond their conceptions. But that's also why all of us, when we do journeys or work with the other world, we see something different. But it's still real. It doesn't make it any less real. It doesn't make it any less true. Just society's lost that ability to see this as real. It sees imagination as fantasy and relegates it to fantasy novels. And it sees magic as impossible. Not that fantasy novels aren't good, by the way. But magic and imagination is what's created the modern world that we're all caught up in right now. So it's not what's going to happen that we're talking about here, that I'm talking about either. It's working about the energies that are out there now, and how can I best use and cooperate with the energies that are available to us? Which is why I started it with, if not now, when? Because these energies are immense. Absolutely immense. There's this concept of kairos in Greek philosophy, and it's within astrology as well. It's about divine time. It's about synchronicity. When dreams and visions coexist with reality, when we bring the energy of the earth and the sky, the upper world and the lower world, into our hearts as a fire and a passion for life, into the fire of our own hearts combined with the fire of the earth and the fire of the sky, that's when the future becomes liminal and becomes visible. And when what's visible, it can become real and tangible. And we're at a point where those cycles of time are synchronizing to bring us the opportunity to remember our own heritage, our star heritage, our earthly heritage, our ancestral heritage. Remembering earth and sky together, the earth and heavens, because that's the duality that created the whole. But it won't happen by simply wishing and hoping and thinking or ignoring. We need to decide. Which path are you on? Feeding into the old fears, or are we going to be feeding into a new paradigm? What are we feeding? This was a quote by a guy called Gordon White, and he said, "Don't oppose war, but seek peace." And I thought that was really profound. Really profound. And then he said, don't, as druids, some of us are druids here, I know, but in lots of other spiritualities will begin a ceremony with calling for peace. But he said, don't call for peace, but just call peace itself, as if it's a godlike presence. And I thought that was beautiful. Peace is there. We don't need to call for it. It's there. We need to call it in as a godlike presence. So it's all about intention. It's not just about self-development here, but about how we can all contribute to the collective consciousness of the planet. You see, the soul isn't just within us, but it exists as our connection to nature, to the soul of the planet, our solar system, and the galaxies beyond. And we're all connected. And what we think, how we act, what we do affects everything. Go back to that, sorry. And it's focus on what and not how. We can get hung up on the how that things are going to happen, how things are going to turn out, but it's focusing on what our intention is, and then allowing things to unfold within the forces that we're now experiencing at this time. So let's talk quickly about working with Saturn as well, because Saturn in Pisces is one of the major things that we've got for the next few years. Saturn is about discipline. The thing about Saturn is if we don't work with him and honor him, someone else will. And if that someone else is an authoritarian government or an authoritarian employer or any authoritarian situation, they will use Saturn and we won't. So Saturn wants discipline, it wants consistency, it wants maturity. It's about doing what needs to be done. And it's a work. Saturn is about identifying the right mountain to climb, putting in loads and loads of effort and finding you're on the peak of a mountain, and then you look across the valley and you're on the wrong mountain. It's identifying the right mountain. Being aware that we might be told no. If we're working with the wrong things, Saturn will tell us no. There'll be a barrier, a boundary. No. We have the ability, because we are humans, to work through that no, but it won't be a good outcome if we choose to do that. Saturn wants us to work with introspection and with solitude. So this gives us a chance to take our personal authority back from the world. So in Pisces, Saturn can be confusing, and that's one of the things that we need to be aware of with Saturn there. He brings us gifts, but he gives us some issues there. Saturn himself can get confused because if he's in Pisces, he's in the temple of either Neptune or Jupiter, whichever you want. And so Saturn says, I want structure. And Jupiter or Neptune will go, oh, okay. Here's a wave to work with. Here's a deep ocean to work with. Here's a sandy beach to work with. And so there's no solidity to that. So we need to create and understand that our own solid ground is important to us. So we need to understand where that solid ground is so that we can take back our personal authority. Find that solid ground. Meditate, pray, journey, whatever works for you. And then work with the real, tangible, material and physical, because that's what Saturn wants from us. Again, focus on what, not how. Working with Pluto. I've already said this. He's the invisible secret agent of change, is Pluto. So how can you believe in something you can't see and can't understand? Because Pluto you can't. We're working with something primordial here. And we need to recognize that. The more you fight Pluto, the worse it gets. So we need to release control here. And we need to be comfortable with not knowing how things are going to work out. And Pluto always requires an initiatory descent of some shape or form. You might be doing it willingly, or he might take you there no matter what. If you think about the descent of Inanna, those of you who remember my talks about the various planets, we often talked about Inanna and Ereshkigal, where Inanna is taken down into the other world. She meets the queen of the underworld, Ereshkigal. It's interesting that in ancient mythology, the queen of the underworld was female, and now we've got Pluto as lord of the underworld, but it was Ereshkigal back in Babylonian times. And for each level, Inanna descended, an item of her clothing was stripped from her until she was naked and brought before Ereshkigal, naked and bowing before the goddess of the underworld. So there's huge clues there to the feminine power of the Pluto archetype. So we can restore to sacredness that which was sacred and has now become taboo. So that the sacred feminine has an awful lot to give here. And it's really important we recognize that too. And once again, it's all about intention. Now, working with Saturn and working with Pluto, you might say, well, hang on, Pluto is saying release control, and Saturn wants us to give control. But Saturn is identifying where you want to go. Saturn is recognizing that it's a material force that you want to work towards, and then releasing control to Pluto and allowing it to happen. So this is what Liz Green says about Pluto very quickly. Pluto represents the gradual loss of everything which one has previously used to define one's identity, and the bowing low of humiliation, humility, and eventual acceptance of something greater and more powerful than oneself. So, this is Inanna going down into the underworld, meeting the gatekeepers, taking her all the way down. And Inanna, remember, is an earlier form of Ishtar, Aphrodite, Venus. So perhaps we're working with Venusian energies here, Aphrodite's energies here, as we move down into the underworld, if we're prepared to make that journey, or allow Pluto to take us on that journey. It's a process. This isn't an overnight thing. We allow it to unfold. We allow that gradual process of everything that we thought defined who we were and how we were living and the society we live in. And we allow to let go of that, bowing low with humility and maybe finding something greater than more powerful than we ever thought possible. That's what Pluto gifts us. So we're now in a time, and have been since 2008 really, where that statement for the individual applies to all of society. I think so far that has been beginning to happen. I think Pluto in Aquarius will up the ante. So let's have a look at some positive planetary potential here. Saturn moving into Pisces, Pluto moving into Aquarius, Jupiter moving into Taurus. We're looking at creating structure, organization, business strategy, and revenue around ventures that are founded on those principles of spirituality, energetics, and so on. We're looking at an opening into the mysteries. So what can we do? So this isn't short-term stuff. We've seen this energy is going to be around probably till 2043. Well, it will be around till 2043 in one way or another. But shorter term, it's till 2026. So we need to make long-term plans. None of this is easy. And we might find lots of moments of peace over the coming years, but we have to stay vigilant, really, for the overall direction of society itself and our overall direction. Where are we heading? So intention is everything here. These transits will affect everyone, and we have a duty to do our bit. But of course, there's no coercion. You can choose not to. You can choose to do nothing. You can choose to abdicate any responsibility for what's going on in the world and say it doesn't affect me, and that's fine. But it's that complacency that's a danger, will allow other forces to take control of society. So we need to make plans, not just for a month, not just for a year, that they're useful. We need to make plans for up to 10 years ahead and then we'll start to begin to see results against those plans. We're working with long-term patterns with Pluto that reflects, along with all those other outer planets, plus the taskmaster of reality that's Saturn. So we need to make sure we're working with honor and respect and long-term. That intention is everything. We need to engage spiritually, magically, and physically. We still need to support groups like, let's say, Extinction Rebellion or whatever, others that are fighting to bring awareness of what's happening to this world. And we still need to be very watchful over the removal of hard-won rights. They're already happening, not just in far-off countries like Hungary and Turkey. They are happening in the US, and they are happening right here, right now in this country. And remember, we have to ask. The spirits are there. For most of us, we have to ask them to help us. They want to help us, but they're not always available. So let's think about ceremony and ritual, doing them at the right times. Be aware of when the right times are, where the significant points in our lives, in the cycle of the wheel of the year, of the astrology. When are those times? We can meditate. We can find out what we can discover from meditation. We can journey and ask. We can ask our spirit guides and our helpers. Having a regular spiritual practice will enable us to focus. And we can use astrology as a cosmic blueprint if we're that way inclined. We can look at our own personal charts to see where the planets are interacting with our own personal charts so that we can use those strengths. But working with the cosmic planetary movements themselves will help, but they won't sit exactly with your personal planets. We need to step outside our comfort zones. We need to come into new experiences and work with different timelines. We need to use our luminous body. Those of you who are druids will know that the light body exercise. Some of you are Buddhist and will know about luminous body consciousness and so on. We need to use that consciously and frequently. And we need to always work from our heart space. What does our heart tell us? What does the fire in our heart tell us through this time? So, final message. Find your own magic and work with it consciously to create the future that you wish to see. There we are. Hope some of you are still here. And thank you for watching.